Yo, so I know there are a bunch of people who are playing Deadlock who come from primarily shooting game backgrounds like Overwatch, stuff like that. So they maybe haven't played a MOBA and they don't have a lot of like MOBA fundamentals built into them. So I thought today we would talk a little bit about like the macro side of Deadlock. I'm going to break this up into 3 different videos, talking about the laning phase, the mid game, and then the late game later on. So today we're just going to focus on specifically the laning phase in Deadlock. So if you haven't played a MOBA before, the safest place to be in your lane is always behind your creeps. You see, as we step up, obviously these guys are attacking us. They're dealing a significant amount of damage to us, right? And so if we had another lane opponent that we were, trying to fight, if we were to jump back behind the line and we were shooting them, we were fighting them and whatnot, you see that obviously we're taking damage from their creeps as well. So even if us and our opponent were dealing the exact same amount of damage to each other, we would be losing that exchange because we're taking damage from their creeps as well. So the safest place to be is always behind your creep line. So we can move up now a little bit because we've got our creeps pushing up. And in a traditional MOBA, the way that we're going to gain all of our, in this case, souls, but usually like gold, our resources, is by landing the killing blow on the enemy creeps. So as we got the last hit there, you saw that we got 38 gold, and then a soul sort of rose up, and it was able to give us another 38 gold. So this soul mechanic is incredibly important in Deadlock. I'm going to say it's more important than last hitting even, and I'll break down my logic for that. But as you see, we're just going to shoot this. This turret's going to push out the wave a little bit. We're going to get the last hit, and then we're going to shoot the soul to secure the last little bit of money there. We can do it again. We'll shoot this, shoot the soul, and we'll reload here a little bit as well. Oop, you get the idea. Now you'll notice that as this tower shoots our friendly minion, no soul is rising out of these, and that's because a soul is only generated when a minion is last hit, when a player lands the killing blow. So the souls, I say that they're more important than getting last hits because of a couple of key reasons. So let's just talk about this real quick and sort of break down why this is. So in Deadlock, you get 50% of the value from a minion when you get the last hit, and you get another 50% of the value when you shoot the soul. So let's talk about a situation where we're literally AFK. We have an opponent in our lane, we're AFK, we're not at the keyboard, we're sitting in base, we're buying items, we're doing whatever. And let's say the opponent is particularly on the ball. So they're going to get 50% of the value from our creeps by getting all of the last hits, and then they're going to get another 50% of the value from our creeps when they last hit all the souls, meaning that they're getting 100% of the value from our creeps out of the lane. A second scenario where we're in the lane, but we're coming from a traditional MOBA background. Maybe we don't know about the soul mechanic. We're only focusing on getting last hits, but we're not thinking about the souls at all. And again, the enemy player is on the ball again. Now we're creating a situation where we're getting 50% of the value from last hitting these minions, but the opponent is now getting 50% of the value from last hitting our creeps, 50% of the value from last hitting our souls, and 50% of our value from last hitting the souls that we're generating by last hitting the creeps. So as opposed to the first situation where they were getting just 100% of the value, now it's a situation where we're getting 50% value, but the enemy is getting 150% of the value that they would be getting out of the lane, meaning that you coming into lane and last hitting the creeps but not focusing on souls at all is making the game harder than if you were literally AFK. So because of this, it's very, very important. And a third scenario here. Let's say that we're not focused on last hits at all. We're just focusing on denies. And we're really on the ball. We're last hitting all of the souls that our opponent is generating. So they're getting 50% of the creep value from last hitting ours, and then we're sniping and we're getting 50% of their potential value by last hitting the souls, so it's 50-50. This is why I say that last hitting the souls is more important than last hitting. If you just focus on specifically last hitting, then you're creating a 50 to 150 scenario. And if you're just focusing on souls, you're creating a 50 to 50 scenario, right? So it's better to focus on the souls and not grief your entire lobby, your entire game, than it is to come in and just specifically focus on getting last hits and whatnot. So from here, we can talk a little bit more about the rest of the lane. So in general, you want to be sort of line of sighting and dodging around all of these different objectives, or not objectives, but like little map intricacies, the little pillars, this thing, because you want to be able to step out, get a last hit, step out, shoot a soul, but you don't want your opponent to be like beaming you the entire time, right? You're going to lose a lot of health that way, and it's going to be a really inefficient way to play the lane. If the opponent were to step over the minion line, then you sort of engage them for the same reason that we don't want to step over the minion line. The exchange is just going to be in your favor. You do, depending on the hero that you're playing, want to be using your skills proactively to try to interrupt the opponent from being able to last hit things. So like say one of my creeps was getting slow, I'm playing Haze, I throw out a dagger, I put the enemy to sleep, they're no longer able to get that soul, I'm able to last hit freely or what have you. Or I sleep them, I'm able to get a really big exchange by like doing a charge punch, and then they're now down a little bit of health, we're up a little bit of health, things like that. Another thing I forgot to mention about last hitting is that in this game, obviously there's this soul mechanic, but if we were to melee this creep, we just get 100% of the value of the creep without having to interact with the souls at all. You just immediately get it. There's no opportunity for the opponent to be able to steal it at all. So if we're in a lane where we've won a couple of exchanges, we're up a decent amount of health, one of the better ways to leverage that is by playing forward and sitting kind of in your minion line to be able to get these last hits with the fist, because they're still going to be, you know, they're in danger, they're going to be shooting, they're going to be generating souls, so you could like snipe it as your minions die here, but you're not giving them an opportunity to get any of the value that you would be generating. You're just straight up getting 100% of the value this way. So I think that's really, really important. Another thing that's really important, my perspective on these towers right now is they're pretty squishy. Like if you push under them a decent amount of times, they're going to take a significant amount of damage from the minions themselves. So I think it's not necessarily worth it to be like, let's say we kill our lane opponent, right? They're dead. The most important thing is shoving the minions under this wave so that all of these minions die and the opponent is losing out on the souls that they could get from last hitting these and last hitting their souls, rather than focusing on getting this turret down. If we think about it, once this turret is down, I'm pointing at the minimap at the bottom right, suddenly if we want to continue getting last hits, we have to come and we have to start playing in this sort of region of the map, up closer to this objective here. Which could be, it carries a lot of risk from people who are still, you know, say this lane is still at an equilibrium. They could very easily rotate and suddenly they're behind us, right? So it's very, very unsafe. As opposed to, you know, if we just keep the tower alive and it keeps shoving the lane back here, then we can play in this much safer region of the map here. So we push under the tower, we let the tower delete these creeps so that the opponent is losing out on a lot of value, but we're not in a rush to kill this tower, because really the biggest reward that a team gets for killing towers is once all of the tier 1 towers have died, and then you get this flex slot, right? So until, a couple of towers are getting low, I feel like it's not necessarily a priority to knock down a tower as fast as you possibly can, especially because like, you're more vulnerable because you're pushed up to an advantageous position, but the enemy also becomes incredibly safe because somebody in a supporting lane, like in this orange lane here, they now have to go way deep into enemy territory to try to fuck with that guy, and it just doesn't end up being worth it. Another thing that we want to consider is like, what is the dynamic of our lane like? This is influenced by you and the type of character you're playing and the play style that you like to have, but also by the opponent and the type of play style that they have. The three general dynamics, as I'll outline them, are a very passive lane where you and your opponent are basically playing around cover the entire time. Neither one of you is going in and making a big risk or a big play on the opponent. Neither one of you is really focused on harassing each other. You're both just hyper-focused on getting as many souls and as much currency out of the lane as possible. In a lane like this, your items should be focused primarily on just making your character stronger. That's probably going to be the most important thing. The second type of lane is a lane where you and the opponent are poking at each other a lot. And so you're harassing, you're taking down a lot of health, but not like all at once. It's not a burst. It's not like, oh, we got into a fight, I only have 100% life left or anything like that. And the third type of lane dynamic is one where you and your opponent are very, very aggressive. You get right back to lane. They immediately want to fight again. You land a skill. You do a big punch. They use all of their abilities. You both get down to low life, and then you're kind of unsure what to do, right? So in that second example, where you're just kind of poking and chipping away at somebody, you might want to focus on getting an item like Extra Regen. So Extra Regen is something that is very passively going to give you more health over time, and it's going to help you deal with those sort of extended little bits of damage that are coming in. As opposed to in the third type of situation where you're going in and you're hammering away at each other, you're going to want to look at something more like Healing Right, which doesn't have like a passive regenerative component to it necessarily, but it does give you bonus health. And instead, it now has an active component, which allows you to regen a lot more health, but on demand. So something like this is going to help you deal with little bits of damage that are coming in, over time. And then an item like this is going to help you deal with those big bursts of damage. And, if we had something like this, we got into a really big exchange. We'll just simulate it by going and messing with these creeps over here. So they're hurting us. Oh no, these creeps are also hurting us. We're losing so much life. Oh, yeah, our creep is healing us, by the way. I'll talk about that in a sec. But we've lost a bunch of life. Now suddenly we can just use the Healing Right on ourselves. And we're now regenerating a lot of health really, really fast. Now, if we were to get shot while this is active, it would stop the healing. So you have to play kind of safe while this is active. But imagine this situation where you get back to lane, your opponent wants to scrap, you both go down to 100 health. Suddenly you walk away for a second and then you return to lane and you're at 675. You're back at full health. They're like, what the hell? How did that happen? And then we're back in that situation where they have to play back and you're able to come up and you're able to start meleeing these creeps again, right? So that's a really big thing. Something else that I neglected to talk about is that these types of creeps that have the staff sort of poking out of their backs, these are healing creeps. So let me see if I can take a little bit of damage from these creeps. So we're taking damage. If I were to go back over here, you see these lines are connecting to me now, and they're healing me over time. So in that second type of lane dynamic, where you and your opponent are chipping away at each other over time, it's more important to focus on killing these creeps on the opponent's side so that they're not getting those little passive bits of healing regen by playing around it. And similarly, on your side, there's not much that you can do to like defend these creeps per se, but you do want to like sort of stand in a way where you're opening your line of sight to these creeps, but you're closing your line of sight to like somebody who's over here and, trying to harass you, trying to shoot you, trying to go all in on you. So I feel like those are a lot of the major things. Of course, anytime you kill the opponent, like we said, you want to shove under tower, and then you want to come back here and you want to try to buy some items, make sure that you're sufficiently strong. I guess another principle that we could briefly talk about is that if you are dying a lot, you don't necessarily have to come back to this lane and keep dying. Like some people, if you come from a background like League or something like that, you're very used to this like, oh, I died once in lane. The only thing I can do is go back to the lane. That's not necessarily the case here. If this tower dies, it stinks. You like lose this little shop over in your yellow lane, but it's not the end of the world. Like we mentioned earlier, the big consequence is once a team loses all of their tier 1 turrets. So like losing one is not the end of the world. You can always go and, if the lane isn't going the way that you want to, you could always grab an item like monster rounds to help you have a little bit more damage against creeps. And then you just go and you find these little creep camps that only have small guys. And you just worry about killing these. And that'll help you to basically safely still get some souls without having to necessarily risk it all. You can also go ahead and destroy some of these like breakable items. So like these boxes can give you souls as well. If we come up here, there's even more. And we're not talking about specifically these boxes that are on this rooftop. There's all kinds of destructible things that are all over the map. If you just run around for a bit, you kill any of the small like jungle creeps that you find, you break all the boxes, all the vases. This is a way that you can still like be getting stronger, be getting some of the resources that you need without putting yourself in as much danger and as much risk. So yeah, I feel like those are a lot of the biggest principles. In the next video, we will talk a little bit more about the mid game and how you decide where you want to place yourself on the map. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. All right, now we can talk a little bit about the mid game. The mid game is where things start to get a little bit nuanced and a little bit complicated. The laning phase is relatively simple. The biggest thing that you're trying to do in the laning phase is just try to get an edge over your single opponent. So you're last hitting, you're getting a bunch of souls, you're trying to get more souls than your opponent out of the lane, but there isn't a lot of ambiguity in terms of like is this the right place to be on the map? Am I doing the right thing? Am I using my time effectively? It's really just like, can I out mechanics this other person in the lane and try to get more out of the lane than they do. In the mid game, the rest of the map starts to open up to you. So now suddenly there's 4 different lanes that you could possibly be in. At the 10-minute mark, you know, your runes are going to start spawning, the urns are going to start spawning, and there's just a lot more on the table for you to do. So first I want to talk about sort of an overarching idea. One thing I'll say here is that I'm trying to future-proof these as much as possible, so I'm going to try to avoid being like very, very prescriptive in this, in the sense of being like, at 10 minutes, you should be doing this. At 12 minutes, you should be doing this. I don't even think that's really how this game works anyway. Instead, we're just going to try to talk about like a mindset that, you know, if you think about things in this way, it should be able to reliably get you to make better decisions, no matter what the patch is, right? So the biggest mindset thing is just that time in any MOBA is the biggest resource that you have. You have to be using your time as effectively as possible. If you are spending a lot of time just like sitting over here and you're in your shop and you're just like, Mystic Reach increases the range and effect of radius of your abilities and items. Okay, that sounds pretty good. Reduces the cooldown of you're wasting too much time. Every second that you're spending not actively making your character stronger or making somebody else on your team stronger is time that your opponents have to leverage and try to do one of those two things, to either make themselves stronger or make their team stronger. And so it's really important that you, in your attempt to maximize your time and efficiency, are trying to get everything out of every second that you possibly can. So part of this is like, as we're moving through the map, we want to be trying to break these little boxes and whatnot. Because as we notice, they drop permanent stats and sometimes money, right? So why is it important that we're breaking the boxes as we go? It's because it costs basically no time to do this at all. We just break some boxes, we keep moving. Got more souls, all right? Now these creeps here, we could try to kill them, but notice that this is taking a significant amount of time. Right, I have to reload, I have to try to use an ability maybe, and now my abilities are on cooldown. Now I can't fight for the next like 20 seconds. We melee, we're reloading again, right? That took a significant amount of time, and we got like maybe 250 souls out of it. So we have to start wondering about, is it worth it? Especially if we compare taking a jungle camp to like coming in this lane, boom. 50 souls, another 100 souls, so that's 200 souls right there, that's 300 souls right there. We've already exceeded what we've gotten out of the farm. Now we've gotten 500 souls out of it, right? So if we can be in a lane farming these creeps, it's much faster to kill lane creeps, for one, because you're getting the advantage from your other creeps also attacking it. It's just more gold in general because one creep is going to give you roughly 100 as opposed to one of these little small guys that's just going to give you 50 when you kill it, right? And you're also, you know, you're pushing the lane in, you're putting some pressure on the enemy objectives, and you're also freeing up some space for you and your team to be playing in, right? So in general, it's if you can be in a lane safely pushing, then it's going to be better than taking these jungle camps. Again, as we're moving through the map, we're just going to break any box that we see, any urn that we see, fire rate, boom, souls, boom, and it's costing basically no time for us to be able to do this at all, right? So it's very, very important that we're trying to get everything out of the time that we have as possible. So like a room like this, I wouldn't even try to take this right now, because even if we could and we would survive, it would just be way slower than trying to go and find something else on the map to do, right? So this is a basic principle, is trying to get everything out of the time that we have as possible. Now, what do we do? There's 3 different ways that, here, I guess we could start here. How do we know when the laning phase is over? How do you know that you're entering the mid game and it's time to start playing on other places on the map? I think the easiest tell for a new player is going to be just once a tower has died. So either your tower or the enemy tower. So why is this? We come back over to this yellow lane. If we come here and we're under our tower, we're feeling relatively safe. We step out, we try to start pushing. As we push, we're now pushing pretty deep into enemy territory. If we look at the mini-map, Now at this point, the enemies are able to come and flank us from behind here. They're able to come to these rooftops and try to gank us here. And as we push further and further to the enemy objective, it's going to get riskier and riskier for us, right? Same is sort of true if we were to take if the enemy were to take our tower and their tower was still up, right? So we could push maybe here, but the problem is that if our tower is dead, then we don't have anywhere that we could really retreat back to easily. If we're here and we still have a tower alive and we're like pushing in this area, and somebody tries to come and gank and rotate in from the side, we can just do this, jump back, and suddenly we're under our tower again. We're feeling pretty good. But if this tower was dead and we're trying to push in this exact same area and somebody comes and attacks us, then we're a long ways away from being able to get to our walker, right? It's a decent ways away, and it gets exponentially worse as we push up further and further. So once either your tower is dead or the enemy tower is dead, you can come back to this lane once it's safe. So if the enemy creep wave pushes up here, then we could come over here and try to farm that because we're feeling pretty safe. Or if our first tower is dead and the creep wave pushes up here, then we could come over here because we're chilling next to our walker. We're also feeling pretty safe here. But unless we have something that we can feel pretty safe under, then we don't want to push out too far. So once a tower is dead, that is a pretty good indicator that your laning phase is over and you could probably be doing better things out on the map. Now, what kind of mindset do we take into this mid game? We'll hop up here. The way I see it, there are 3 different ways that your lane can turn out. And to describe this, I'm going to have to bring out a veteran of the channel. If you've been here a while, you'll probably recognize this. We'll say it. 3, 2, 1. Microsoft Notepad. That's what's up. Okay. So the binary is you're feeling strong, right? Or you're feeling weak. Okay. If you're coming out of this laning phase and you've killed the enemy tower, you've gotten a couple of kills, you have more souls than other people in the lobby, you're feeling pretty strong, then it's important that you leverage this strength very directly. Okay, so what do we mean by this? Can we extend this out? Is this going to break anything? No, we're chilling. So you leverage this strength in a very direct way. This means killing enemy heroes or taking towers / objective. Well, really just towers. Here, talk about that. So if we're feeling strong, we have more souls than anybody in the lobby. We have more items than anybody in the lobby. We've got more kills than anybody in the lobby. And we're just spending our time like down here. We're fighting jungle camps. We're not pushing any lane. We're just trying to farm these. We're not helping our team, get any kills, take any towers, anything like that. Then we're effectively wasting our strength. What's the point of being strong if we're not leveraging it to get an upper hand on the opponent, right? So when you're strong, it's very important that you come out of your lane and you're trying to help other people. So if this lane, even if this lane wasn't struggling, even if this lane was doing perfectly fine, it would be a great idea to come over here, be pushing this lane with them and try to take their tower if we haven't taken the tower in this lane already. Say this lane was already pushed in, they'd already taken their tower, fine. We could just rotate over to another lane and try to take that tower with them, right? But because we're strong, it's important that we're out on the map and we're trying to leverage our strength to help make other players on our team strong, right? In a very direct way. Now, the alternative is that we come out of the laning phase feeling pretty weak, all right? And the way I see it, there's a delineation here as well. And it's, does your character have CC? This is crowd control. Or does your character have no CC? Okay. So crowd control is anything like stuns, roots, knockups, things that are disruptive. It can help people, can help lock people down, catch people out, right? So if your character has crowd control, then you should look for someone on your team who is strong and stand near them. Okay. Now, if we're particularly weak, let's talk about Lash, for example. Lash, he has this tether. He could grapple. I mean, we don't have a target, so we're not able to grapple right now. But he leaps through the air. He's got this big slam move. Boom! They're stunned. They're knocked up. And he's got an ult. He comes. He grabs a bunch of people. He slams them in the ground. They're stunned again. So Lash has a considerable amount of CC. So even if he was a little bit behind, he didn't have the items that he needed to do the damage himself. If he knows that somebody on his team is strong enough to get the kills for him, all he really needs to do is be close enough to be able to stun enemies, to be able to use his abilities, and to be able to help secure those kills for whoever is strong at the moment. Another good example of this is a character like, I believe his name is Dynamo. His ult is, he's got this black hole, he just uses it, it sucks a whole bunch of people in. You don't need items for that ability to be useful. If you catch 2 or 3 people and they're stunned for like 5 seconds at a time, so long as you're standing next to somebody who has the damage to kill them, you're going to be plenty useful, right? And so even if you're not particularly strong, if you have the crowd control to help somebody that is strong, then standing with them while they're, again, leveraging their strength in a very direct way by killing enemy heroes or taking towers, then it's a good idea to just be standing next to them to help them. Now, if the person that is strong is not pushing an objective and is not fighting enemy heroes, they're just like off jungling or whatever, then you don't want to just stand next to them while they jungle, because that's not efficient for you. It's not efficient for anybody. You're not helping them. You're not helping them by CCing the camps. It's not doing anything. So it's better for you to go off and try to, get as much value as you can for yourself, than just like watching them accumulate value for themselves, right? The other way that this can go is your character doesn't have a lot of crowd control. So if your character doesn't have a lot of crowd control, how do I word this? You're trying to get stronger while helping your team indirectly. Okay, so you don't want to completely be like useless to your team. It's still preferable to not like be in here just hitting these jungle camps. If you don't have to be, you still want to be helping your team in an indirect way. So what does that mean? That means if there's a blob of your team that is pushing like this orange or this blue like middle lane, and they're trying to take team fights in this type of area, but all your hero contributes, I realize I still have the notepad up, but all your hero contributes is damage. We're talking about like Lady Geist, we're talking about like Haze, we're talking about like Shiv, right? These characters, they don't bring like big AoE stuns or anything like that to a team fight. All they really contribute is their high damage and kill threat potential. So if you aren't doing any damage, then there's no reason for you to be at a team fight. Instead, it's much better for you to be off in like one of these 2 side lanes and just pushing as hard as you can. And any time that you see heroes disappear from the minimap, you just assume like, oh, they're probably coming to kill me. They've had enough of me pushing this lane, and you just leave. Right. So why is this so good? It's good because you're pushing this lane. We're putting pressure on these objectives, and if the enemy doesn't respond, you will take objectives and you will make the game progressively harder for them. Funny enough, this lane already has lost its towers just from the little bit of pressure that we put on it. Minions are incredibly strong in this game, so if people don't come and respond to you, like, you're going to be pushing all the way through this lane, right? When people start to disappear from the minimap, again, we want to be leaving, right? Because it's better to be safe than sorry. We don't want to get caught. But in general, we're just trying to get enough gold and enough money to get the items that we need to be able to actually contribute to team fights and start producing a little bit of damage. So why these side lanes? It's a little bit away from the team fight. So the enemy heroes, they have to choose, like, should I report to this team fight and try to help win it? Or should I go deal with this Lash, in this example, this Haze, this Lady Geist, this Grey Talon that's off in this lane, just split pushing to try to get that pressure off. The side lanes are also really nice because as you push up the side lanes, you make it way easier to turn in this Soul Urn. So if you're not familiar, this Soul Urn, pick it up. You walk it all the way to the enemy side of the map, or not the enemy side of the map, but the opposite side of the map. We're walking, we're escorting. And again, we picked it up from the leftmost lane, and we're turning it into the rightmost lane. So if both of those lanes were pushed up, then escorting this would be pretty safe. Like, we would feel pretty good about it. So we're coming over here. We're going to come to this little red area. We're going to turn it in. And this in a normal match would give a bunch of souls to everybody on our team. Like here you saw we just got a burst of 3,000 souls for ourselves. And then there's, it looks like about another, no, not even 500. That's a bit more. Oh, that's the purple walker. Never mind. Sorry. I was about to freak out. But in general, we still got like, you know, probably across the team like a 5,000 soul difference. So that's really, really good. Again, if you don't have the damage, the strength to be able to contribute to a team fight, and you don't have the crowd control to be able to contribute to a team fight, it's probably your job to be running the soul urn from one side of the map to the other. When you're escorting the soul urn, you aren't able to fire your weapon and you aren't able to use any of your abilities. So you're basically incapacitated and useless for the sake of fighting people or taking objectives anyway. So it's best that somebody who isn't planning on doing that anyway be doing that objective than like your 7-0 and 8 Infernus who's trying to carry the game having to like stop what they're doing to come and escort the urn and being incapacitated for like the full minute or two that it's going to take to walk everything over, right? And, you know, at some point, as you're pushing all of these side lanes, again, farming lane creeps is very, very efficient. As this is going well, you're going to get enough souls at some point that you're going to get the items that you need to go and be effective in fights. And at that point, it starts to become worth it again for you to be reporting to team fights and trying to help. But if you are the type of character, again, that only produces damage, you don't have a lot of crowd control, and also you don't do any damage because you're so behind, then it is not worth it for you to be at a fight, right? So here we can just come and click these items. And this is a good thing to mention here too. If you, again, time is everything. And so if you don't know what all of these items do and you're not, you know, you're thinking about like reading these different things to be like, oh yeah, that sounds kind of good. Just find a build through the build browser and just buy the items that it tells you to buy in order. It's way better to like just buy items from a build and not necessarily know what they're going to do and not waste time than to like spend here dilly-dallying and trying to figure out exactly what the best thing to get is, right? So I think these are the biggest things. Another thing I guess we could talk about is when we're fighting as a team, this is going to be hard for you to coordinate because you're going to have to convince like 5 other people. But when you're fighting as a team, ideally, you're fighting for something. So there are a bunch of times that I'll see like, how do I explain this? Like say this blue lane was pushed in and it was like pushed into right about where we are. This tower is already dead. The lane is pushed all to this point. I've seen, you know, my teammates come and like try to fight in this particular area or even like up here in the mid boss during times where like it's not possible for the enemy team to be taking the mid boss if they win the fight. Like even if they win the fight, they're not going to take mid boss. And even if we were to lose the fight, like they're probably not going to be doing so much damage. Like maybe they'll take this Walker, maybe, but they're definitely not going to come up and take these. So this is a fight that I would say is like not really over anything. As opposed to like, if we were up here, we were pushing this Walker and a fight were to happen to break out, there's very clear stakes to a fight like this. If we win the fight, we're taking this Walker, we're probably going to take those 2 things back there. If we lose the fight, then it's fine. This wave is pushed up. They would have to first push this wave all the way back to the you know, our Walker and then try to push and put pressure on it. But by that point, you know, if we're relatively early in the game, it's very likely that at least a few of us are going to have respawn and be back to be able to defend this, right? So when you're fighting, you should be asking yourself like, okay, when I win this fight, what objective are we going to be taking? Or if it's a defensive fight, what am I trying to prevent from happening by fighting here? And if there isn't a clear answer, if you're just like, I kind of want to just kill a guy. It's a shooting game and I'm getting bored. I don't want to fight creeps anymore. I just want to fight somebody. And it's probably not the best fight to be taking. It's much better for the fight to have very clear stakes. Either you're fighting for this urn so that you can go and you turn it in, you're fighting for like a walk or an objective, or you're fighting to push into the enemy base, you're fighting to defend your base, you want to push this wave out because, you know, having this entire transit line here for the enemy team means that they can come and split push and put pressure on this purple lane at any point. Maybe you want to try to prevent this from happening, right? But you shouldn't be just like fighting randomly in the middle of the map when there's no real objective to be taken, without having like a clear idea of like, okay, if we win this fight, if we lose this fight, what is going to happen, right? Also, I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but there's a shop in the middle of the map. We were talking earlier about using your time efficiently. If you have enough health and you don't have to go back to heal, then it's much better to just report to one of these two shops in the middle of the map. One of them is here, and then mirrored on the exact opposite side. Exact same shop. You just report to whichever one is closest to you, and get the items you need and get back out. The other one is right in here. Oop. So yeah, those are the biggest things. Again, trying to use your time as effectively as possible. If you're very strong, if you're the strongest player on your team, you want to be leveraging that in a very direct way, trying to fight the enemy players, trying to push enemy objectives. If you are not particularly strong, but you have crowd control abilities that don't require items to be useful to people that are strong, then you want to go and try to play next to and stand next to people that are strong. Now, if you're not particularly strong and you don't have abilities that are useful just on their own, then you want to be useful by pushing out these side lanes, by trying to farm as efficiently as possible so you can get back in the game, by running the urn from your team for your team, since you're the least likely to be fighting anybody anyway, and that is going to be the best way for you to be able to help out your team. And another good thing about split pushing, I guess we should talk about this very quickly as well, because I know along with it already. The other thing about split pushing is that if we're one person in this lane, we're pushing this lane, right? We're pushing it pretty deep in enemy territory. And let's say that the enemy team is trying to push like down this orange lane or down this blue lane or what have you. And the fight is relatively even. It's not really breaking in one way or the other. If one person tries to come over and fight us and we just leave, then suddenly we've created a better situation for our team to be able to take this fight, right? Or if we're even strong enough to be able to duel one person, we're just not strong enough to be able to contribute a team fight, maybe that means that they have to send two people over to try to deal with you now. And if two people report to try to deal with one person, then suddenly you've created a 4v5 for your team, which is very favorable. So again, it's important that you're trying not to get caught, but if you can be enough of a distraction that it forces the enemy team to acknowledge you and send 1-2 people over to try to deal with you, then that is huge. That can help your team win team fights, even if you're literally not there. So yeah, I presented a lot of information. I feel like I've rambled on for long enough. These are just the basics. And, you know, again, it's not very prescriptive. These are just like some mindset things that I want you to be thinking of. Now to round out this series, I want to talk a little bit about the late game. The point in time where you enter the late game is a little bit ambiguous, and I think it comes down to feeling a lot of the time. It was easy enough in the mid-game guide to say like, okay, when either your tower or their tower gets knocked down, you've freed up some space for you to wander around the map. And even if it's not true that that is literally the mid-game, like some of the time, it's still like a very usable benchmark that is true more times than not. The late game, I feel like, is marked by like a period of time where the power levels of the heroes are getting to such a point that it is no longer viable to really be alone, like off farming jungle camps or split pushing lanes or anything like that. Because if the enemy team were to group of 6 and just storm the gates, they would basically be able to wipe out your team and end the game before you were able to really threaten anything on your own. So I think the late game is defined by a period of time where team fighting is basically no longer negotiable. It's mandatory. And so I think a lot of navigating the late game comes down to the ways that you are preparing for these team fights that are going to happen. Now, the first thing we'll talk about is just buying items that solve problems. And admittedly, if you're new to MOBAs or if you're new to Deadlock and you don't know what all of the items do, super fair, super reasonable. This isn't going to be incredibly accessible to you. I apologize. This is just something that comes with time. But I wanted to talk about it a little bit and give you some ideas to start off with, just because it's something that you're going to have to think about at some point. So when I'm talking about proactively trying to solve problems, this is something that kind of happens tangentially with the mid game as you're progressing later into the game. And it's looking at like the enemy team and like holding shift. And if we bought a bunch of items, then like these 3 bars would have 3 different colors. It would be orange, green, and purple. And so we would be looking at the strongest players on the enemy team, and we would be trying to figure out if they're doing more physical damage or if they're doing more spirit damage. And in that way, trying to buy some sort of mitigation that would help us deal with some of the stronger members on their team. So if, for example, the strongest players on their team are like Hayes, then maybe we want to get this bullet armor relatively early on, transition it into having improved bullet armor later on, because we know Hayes, she doesn't really have the capacity to do a whole lot of spirit damage. She's pretty much just going to be doing physical damage, so getting some kind of mitigation to help you in that regard is really, really useful. On the exact opposite side of the coin, most of the really successful Grey Talon builds right now are spirit-based. So if we hold shift, we see that the Grey Talon is pulling ahead. They're using a lot of purple items. They've got a lot of spirit. Then we do the exact opposite. We buy some improved spirit armor, just try to mitigate and prepare for the bursts of damage that are going to be coming our way. We're also trying to solve the problems for our team as best as we can, while acknowledging that like you can't do everything for everyone. So we'll stay with the same example, like the Hayes is pulling away. Hayes, again, just to talk about her kit, she's got the knife that she throws, it sleeps a single person. She has the stealth mode that gives her a speed boost. She's got a left click modifier that just gives her left clicks a little bit of spirit damage. And she's got the ult, which is, we'll just say it, it's kind of like the, what's the shotgun guy from Overwatch? Reaper. She's got like the Reaper ult where she spins around in a circle and shoots people a bunch of times, and that's all physical damage as well. So again, pretty much entirely physical damage. So if we're trying to solve this problem, and we're trying to solve it for the entire team, then one of the better items that we could try to buy is something like Knockdown. So Knockdown is only 3,000, so it's relatively efficient for solving this problem. You channel it for 2 seconds, or I guess it's got a 2-second delay. It doesn't say it's channeled, but you just knock an opponent down and stun them. So as Hayes is, you know, she's spinning around, she's doing her ult, you use this on her, boom, she's knocked down. You potentially save your entire team from eating this ult, right? Does take 2 seconds, so it's not like the perfect solution, but it's still better than, you know, not having a solution at all. But let's say Hayes, on the exact opposite side of the team, is trying to get ahead of that exact issue. They think like, okay, we're getting to a point, I know I'm the problem, I'm doing a lot of physical damage, a lot of it's coming from this ult, they're going to try to interrupt the channel, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to buy Unstoppable. So this is basically double the cost of Knockdown, it's 6,300, but the active, it's got a 60-second cooldown, suppress negative status effects and become immune to stun, silence, sleep, roots, and disarm. So basically, before she goes to ult, she just activates this, and then you can't interrupt her at all, right? So this is what I mean by you buy items to attempt to solve the problem for as much of your team as possible, while acknowledging that the opponent can do the exact same thing and try to outmaneuver you, right? So we'll continue with this example. You bought Knockdown. Cool. Hayes is now bought Unstoppable to try to counter it. Boo. Now we kind of just have to try to solve the problem for ourselves. Metal Skin is a pretty good option. So we use the active, we become immune to bullets and melee attacks. We basically just shrug off all physical damage, right? So this solves the problem for ourselves. And, you know, we could maybe just like entirely skip the Knockdown and get the Metal Skin and just be like, oh, we're safe. But again, it's worth it to like try to solve the problem for as many people on your team as possible before saying like, okay, like I'll just fix it for my own personal character, right? So I understand that this is something that, again, is not going to come naturally if you're like brand new to MOBAs or brand new to Deadlock. You don't know what all the items in the game do yet. Totally fair. But it's still worth talking about because the items that you're bringing to these late game team fights really, really matter. And if we're still talking about this example, like you bought Knockdown, they bought Unstoppable, you bought Metal Skin, you've solved the problem for yourself. Okay, you still have Knockdown, Now you're trying to look for another target on their team that has a channeled ability that you can try to interrupt. Maybe like the Mo and Krill isn't incredibly fed. They're not, you know, they're not like going to run away with the game or anything, but they don't have unstoppable, so I can try to prevent him from ulting on one of my teammates or something like that. You just try to think about what you're going to use these items on before you get into the fight, so that once you're in the fight, it's not like a muddled, confusing mess. Another thing is, as we're approaching these late game team fights, you want to try to have in mind like who your main targets are. So I think it's a really common misconception and like misplay that some teams will do to try to focus the strongest person on the enemy team. I've heard people in comms be like, oh, this Shiv is literally their entire team. You know, they're 17 and 0 and 7. Like, if we just kill this guy, like the rest of the game will be easy, right? And so they'll try to focus the strongest player on the team. This is the exact opposite of what we want to do, right? First off, if they're like alone and you can just get a pick, then that's totally fine. Like, they're alone, just jump them, just kill them, right? But if we're talking about a team fighting situation, you don't want to try to focus all of your attention on the guy that is going to be the hardest to kill. In the mid-game guide, we talked about how even if you aren't particularly ahead in terms of resources, if you have abilities that come with crowd control, you can still be useful in a team fight. You can still knock people up, you can still stun people, you can still silence them, you can still root them, and it can be helpful enough for the people who are far enough ahead to be able to help them win the team fight, right? The same is true in the late game. So if you are dumping all of your resources in trying to kill the person that is the absolute hardest to kill and ignoring the useful targets to them that are possible to kill, then that is the exact wrong way to go about it. Instead, what you want to do is try to figure out who on their team is like the most reasonable target for you to kill while still being reasonably high value, and trying to get all of the other teammates off of the board, basically, so that once like the Shiv is alone, like obviously if we're 5v1ing, like we can win that. That's very doable. It doesn't matter how fed he is. There's 5 of us here, right? So this is like a much shorter video. I don't feel like there's a whole lot to talk about with the late game. I guess the other thing we could talk about is the mid boss. The mid boss is kind of like the we're gonna try to win the game now objective. It's a big booger monster in the middle of the map, and all he really does is when you kill him, there's a big gem that drops down, you do a heavy melee on it, skadoosh, and it basically gives your entire team like a really fast revive. So because you have a really fast revive, and I think you don't give souls to the enemies that kill you while you have it. I could be wrong about that, don't quote me on that. But you kill this guy, you get a revive, and then you all just sort of run at the enemy base, run at an objective, and even if you all die, you just all instantly respawn, so there's basically no risk to it at all. So if you're able to win a fight and it's in the middle of the map, you don't feel like you can literally go and end the game, you take the mid-boss instead, and then that should be enough leverage to help you close out the game. And if you win a fight and it's close enough to the enemy base, then you just try to end the game, try to close it out before they revive. But like if you're like at the enemy gates, like say you're up here by these towers up here, and you win a team fight, don't like run back and try to get the mid boss, like just try to close out the game. And conversely, if you're like here in this blue lane that's relatively shoved up and you win a fight, don't try to push this lane all the way to the enemy base and try to end the game. Just take the mid boss, because it's going to give you enough leverage to probably close the game anyway. So yeah, those are the big things. Again, this is probably the shortest video just because it like a lot of the late game and the mid game share a lot of the same principles. A lot of the things that we talked about in the mid game are still going to be true here. The major things that aren't true anymore is that like it's now no longer really feasible for a player on your team to be off split pushing alone. You know, if the enemy team, they're strong enough at this point that if all 6 of them gather and they just want to force an objective, then they're going to get the objective unless all of you respond and try to stop it in kind. And trying to proactively prepare for those team fights is really just the biggest thing. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I appreciate you all watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.